So, hello and welcome to Engaging Data's WhereScape Formula One test drive. During the course of this session, today we'll be exploring the world of data automation and how it can accelerate data engineers and data science teams to achieve more in less time. We have a virtual environment set up for everyone to use, and we'll come on to that later on. But just to go through the course of today, there'll be an intro about WhereScape from our friends Christy and Pat from WhereScape, where they will take you through how WhereScape works, what WhereScape can do, and what benefits there are. And after that, I'll jump back in the driving seat and I'll take you through the rest of the session where we'll be using WhereScape to play with Formula One data and build a data model fit for a data science team. A little bit about me. So my name's Simon Meacher. I have worked in data analytics for over 25 years now. I have a passion for developing teams and making sure that they are as effective and efficient as possible. And that doesn't matter whether they're technical or non-technical, more creative teams. I started using WhereScape about 15 years ago. And when we started using that, it radically changed the teams that I created to help them produce more efficient and consistent code. And that took away from some of the pain points we had within the team, such as different developers producing different types of code standards. Since building Engaging Data up, we have used WhereScape as one of our flagship tools. It's one of the market leading tools in data automation, and it's gone on for us to help people modernize data warehouses to building efficient data models for data science teams. Right, to start off with, we're going to get Christy up from WhereScape, and she'll tell you a little bit about WhereScape and the benefits of this tool.
Hi, I'm Christy Webb, so I work at WhereScape in the account management team, looking after all of our new and existing customers. I've been at WhereScape for the last 7 years, and we've grown massively in that time. So globally, we have over 1,000 customers worldwide, and we've been around for over 20 years in total. What we're really all about is connecting that data from A to B as quickly and accurately as possible, so massively increasing return on investment and automating all the routine tasks that slow developers down. So some examples of the customers that we work with, so Vodafone, for example, they were able to cut their time to production from 6 months down to 2 days, eliminating the cost of their ETL solution and drastically reducing their loading time also. IQVIA, so they were able to add a dimension in a couple of minutes with just one tool instead of multiple tools and 5 to 10 different steps each time. And then we have Rabobank as well in the Netherlands. So they are now able to release into production in 2 hours rather than 2 weeks. So working in a much more agile way and delivering results a lot quicker. We go by the slogan of you architect, we automate. So we don't mind how you want to manage your data and what it is that you want to do. Whether you're looking at Data Vault, Data Lake, Data Marts, whatever your loading patterns are, or whichever platform, whether on cloud or on-prem, we can support that and automate all the repetitive work. And again, these are just an example of some of the platforms that we can support, variety of on-prem, cloud platforms available. What we really want to deliver is reducing that cost and reducing the risk, providing a lot greater consistency and supportability, making it much easier to evolve, expand and port to new platforms in the future. Everything is auto-documented and fully compliant, but ultimately it's all about faster results to end users and happier end users. So we'll go through all of this in more detail throughout the test drive, but what we do is we do this with 2 core tools within our product suite. We have WhereScape 3D and WhereScape Red. So 3D is our design tool, so you can discover source systems, profile data, design your models and generate the metadata. And then you would push this through to Red, which is our physical builder tool, generate those physical structures, follow the ELT process, schedule jobs, automatically document, and then ultimately deploy. And this is a union-all diagram, but what we can do is everything in between these 2 red columns and everything in the middle, including the red columns. So omit the elements not relevant to your architecture. So if you're following the Data Vault methodology, load, you can create your data, the data foundation layer, perform the necessary transformations just through to a business vault, and then through your reporting tool. So at that point, I'll hand over to Pat, who will go through this in a bit more detail.
Okay, hi, my name's Pat Callahan. Worked for WhereScape for about 8 or 9 years. With a background in data warehousing and BI, basically going back to the Steam age. So just to quickly go through this picture again, this shows the different industry standard approaches you can take to designing a data warehouse. So just to explain the diagram, on the left we have our sources, which can be basically anything we can access via ODBC. Anything files we can access on lots of different file systems, Azure Data Lake, Amazon S3, Linux, Unix, Windows, all sorts of different file systems, different file formats, Avro, JSON, XML, Parquet, so on, also APIs, things like that. So lots of different sources on the left side. On the right hand side we have our visualization tools. So that's things like Power BI that allow you to display the data in reports and dashboards. And the bit in between the red bars is the bit we look after. So the ODS, these are different approaches you can take to designing your data warehouse. Just to explain them, an ODS is basically a one-to-one copy of a source system, optionally with type 2 change history. If you have the type 2 change history, that ODS can act as an audit layer in your data warehouse. Data Vault is that same information split out into hubs, links and satellites. An EDW, that's applying your standard normalization, so normal form, fifth normal form, applying those rules to designing your data warehouse. What you have is on all data warehouses, you will have some sort of presentation layer. So that can be standalone, or it can sit on top of one of these foundation layers. But the presentation layer is where we surface the data. We surface that data conformed, which means that we're comparing apples with apples and oranges with oranges. And we also surface it in a format that's easy for our visualization tools to confirm. And the industry standard for some cake on a Kimball-style star schema. As you're designing the different entities and the different data flows within your data warehouse, we capture metadata, and we use that metadata for a variety of purposes. The first thing we use it for is to generate the DDL to create or alter the different entities on our data warehouse platform, whatever that happens to be. The next thing we use the metadata for is generating the native code to populate those entities, to process those data flows. What I mean by native code is set-based operations, inserts, updates, merges, and around that we put some sort of wrapper, a script, perhaps a procedure, which will look after things like logging. Next thing we use the metadata for is generating documentation. So that's pages of documentation, but it's also lineage. You'd say I have a data item over here, where did it come from, what happened to it on the way, or I have a data item over here, where is it referenced in my data warehouse architecture. So the next thing is scheduler. So we can use our metadata to help us with the orchestration. We can use the metadata to generate jobs with dependencies between tests. So use the metadata to capture all the logging information from runs of those jobs. Metadata is just tables on a database, completely open. You can build reports and dashboards over that. So the last thing on the picture is retrofit. So retrofit is about integrating with existing infrastructure. So yes, we can do the full end-to-end, but if you've already built something, we can use retrofit to basically scrape metadata which describes what you've built and allows us to very rapidly build out. We take over management of those entities, just allows us to build out very quickly on top of that. I think that is all I have to say, so back to the start of the show, Simon.
So before we carry on, while you're logging into your VMs, we're going to explore the actual UI. Once we've done it on screen together, you'll have a chance to do it by yourself, but if you're there already, feel free to carry on. So the first thing we're going to do is log into WhereScape Red, and this is Red 10, which is the newest version of WhereScape. And we're going to use the red sunglasses at the bottom of the screen, and you'll get the login screen. So here, if you have your development repository, you would select that from the top drop down. That will give you one to many repositories depending on how you've set it up. For us, we just have the one. The next thing is how we're going to log into that repository. For all of us here, we're going to use a username and password repository, but you can use AD authentication. And then you put the username and password in the next two boxes, and in the final box we give ourselves a name, and this could be a short name or it can be your full name, however you want. So I'm going to replace mine with Simon Meacher. Once we do that, we hit connect, and connect will log us into the repository itself. And then once we're in the repository, we can take a little look around the user interface. And just to make it easier, I'll expand it and make it full screen. So this is the builder screen. The builder screen is where you're going to do 90% of your work. We also have the scheduler, where we go and schedule jobs and tasks to take place, and that's using the new Azkaban server, so we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And then we have diagrams, and diagrams is really useful for getting visual representation, and as Pat mentioned, it's using metadata to drive the creation of those diagrams. Really useful stuff. So first of all, we're going to explore the builder. So in the builder, we have lots of panes. We have a pane over here, which is the browser pane. At the top, we have the target drop pane, and we'll get onto that in a second. Below that, we have the results pane, and over here we have the source pane. And that's where we'll have all of our sources that we'll then want to incorporate back into our data warehouse. So in the browser pane, I'm going to expand all of the objects, and you can see all the objects down the side there. We have the connections, we have all the different types of tables and objects that we'll become familiar with. So in this test drive, we're going to be looking to augment an existing data model for a Formula One team. So this Formula One team has the race data about drivers, about the races, about the results of those races, and the statuses of those races as well. We've already incorporated the load data for that. We've already staged the data, and we already have a fact races. So fact races will give us all of the information about what drives have happened, what races has happened, and who came in what position. What we're going to do is we're going to act like the Formula One analytics team, and we're going to be asked to incorporate some race qualifying data. So our first step will be to include or add the qualifying data from our race database, our source system, into our data warehouse. In order to do that, we need to browse the source system, and we do that by right mouse buttoning on the F1 connection, and that's our source system. We'll click on Browse Connection. So this is the ODBC connection that takes us into a SQL server. So that is actually stored on a SQL server. The repository itself, the data warehouse, is on a Postgres data warehouse. As Christy and Pat mentioned, these are all interchangeable. If you can connect to a database using an ODBC, then it's an option for you to have as a source or a target. Now back to this connection, we have lots of options in here. We can filter things, we can include tables and views or exclude them, and we can also specify particular schemas. Now we're not going to get that fancy today, we're just going to click on OK. And once you've clicked on OK, our source browser pane will then refresh with all the schemas, and if you expand the DBO schema, you'll see a qualifying table, and that's the table we want to grab and bring into our data warehouse. So it's already in the SQL server. In order to incorporate it into our warehouse, we're going to go to the Browse panel, double click on our load tables, and that will prepare the target panel to receive new table, new information. And we're going to automate the ingestion of the qualifying data. So we'll drag the qualifying table from our source browser and drop it into our target table, and you'll get the first step of the wizard that will say, I think we want to create load table called for qualifying. So it's going to suggest a name, it's going to suggest a target if you want to put it in a particular source table, and it's going to suggest a data mapping. So if you're doing something like Oracle to SQL, and we know there's different data maps or data types, we have to map one to the other, we can set those up. But for now, we can just keep everything standard and click on Add. WhereScape will now come up with the properties for that table. And in that table, we can specify all the information, but just behind the table, you'll see all of the columns that were in the source system have been ingested in and specified within the column details behind the table. So that's the structure of the data we're going to build. And our load table is going to be built in this way. Now, what we now need to do is get WhereScape to use the metadata to build a load script, something that's going to pull the data in from the source system. The connection we're connected to is the F1 source system. The load type is script based. You can use a script based load, or you can use an ODBC load, whichever your preference is. We're going to use a script based load, and we're going to set it to run within the Windows runtime connection. So if we're using another system like Unix, we could specify Unix runtime, but for us it's Windows, because the template we're going to use is a Postgres Python script. So we're going to use Python scripts to load the data in from the source into the target. So I'd like you to select the Postgres Python load template, and that will be used to generate the script. Now, in order to generate the script, we just click on regenerate next to the script name. What will then happen is the templates behind WhereScape will be used to generate a Python script to ingest the data from the source system and inject it into our data warehouse. The automation scripts do give you the chance to slow the whole thing down if you want to, but this is one of those windows. It depends on what kind of developer you are. You either want to say, every time I do this, please create the script for me automatically, and I'm one of those developers, so I'll tick the box and hit yes. But if you're not one of those developers and you want to see this prompt all the time, then you can say no. So when I click yes, WhereScape will now go away and build that script, and then we'll come back and say, hold on a second, we haven't built the structure yet. So although we have the metadata, we haven't built the physical table in the data warehouse. You've got two options. You can either create it and leave it be, or what I'm going to do is create it and get the Python script to run to load the data straight in the warehouse. So let's click that. And now all the automation is taking care of itself. The database structure's been updated in the data warehouse. Python script is now running. Okay, so now that's loaded, in the result panel, we have a whole lot of information. The important thing is the one at the bottom that says 9,575 rows have been updated, so it's been inserted into our table. Now we can test that by right mouse buttoning on our warehouse browser and then clicking on display data on the load qualifying table, and that will summarize the top 1,000 rows in that database table, so we can now see the database table has data in it. So I always use that as a verification to make sure the script has done what it says it's going to do and I've got data in my table before I progress. Now we've loaded the qualifying data, we need to stage that to build a fact table. So in order to do that, we need to stop working with the source system and start working with the data warehouse. So we need to browse the data warehouse by going into the connections and right mouse button on the data warehouse connection in our data warehouse browser. Click on browse connection. Again, it's the same principle as before, but we're just going to click on OK. And then inside of the source browser, you'll see we have two schemas. I want you to expand the stage schema. And in here, you'll see all of the tables that exist in the data warehouse, things that we can use. So in order to take the load table and move it into a stage table, we need to double click on the warehouse browser stage tables, and that will load all of our tables in target panel, ready to receive more information. And we're going to select load qualifying from our source browser pane and drag it into our target pane, and then the automation starts all over again. So now it's saying you're going to build a stage table called stage qualifying, and it's going to put it in the stage target location. So we're going to click on add to that, and again this is now building the stage table. Behind the properties of the stage table are all of the column definitions in the metadata. So what we can now do is set this stage table up to process data and to start to turn this into a fact table. What I'm going to do is click on rebuild on the update script, and this will start to generate the procedure or the script in order to update the stage table. This time it's come and said, actually, do you want to create the table before we carry on with that step? So we are going to say create and load. Once you've clicked create and load, because the script file doesn't exist, the window is going to pop up with the script details. So this is for the input for the script, and we're going to specify a particular business key for this. So again, you'll notice we have different types of templates and we have different types of methods of running this. So we're using Python to generate all of our update scripts, but what we need to specify in this is the business key. So under the business key of this table, there's a little parentheses button. I'd like you to click on that, select qualify ID, and then use the right arrow to add it into the selected column list, like this, and then click on OK. And what this will do is it will set the business key, which we'll use later on. And the last thing we're going to check is that the delete before statement is set to truncate, because we're going to build a very quick flush and fill data warehouse. Setting it as truncate means that we'll always refresh the data in its entirety. The next thing we can do is click on the next button in the bottom left hand corner, and you'll see the way the load table is being structured, so where the data is coming from. And here we might come back later on and join data together and bring two tables in to start merging information together. But for now, we're just going to keep it simple and click on OK on the right hand corner. That will set all the parameters for the update script, and then it will start to generate that update script. So you'll see in the result pane at the bottom, 9,575 rows have been processed into that stage table. Now we have a new stage table and we want to go and build a fact table. But before we do that, we need to specify a few dimensions inside of this stage table. The dimensions are already in our data warehouse because we've got an existing schema, and we're going to reuse some of those dimensions. In our stage table, you can see we have a business key for race ID and a business key for driver ID. And both of those exist under our mart. So if you expand the mart schema in our source pane, you'll be able to select the dim races and drag that over and drop it anywhere into your stage table. In doing that, it will create a dimension key because it recognizes that's what you're trying to build out. And we can do exactly the same with the driver dimension. Now we have two new columns added into our metadata. At this point, the metadata is completely different to what we have in our physical data warehouse. We need to recreate the structure. So if you right mouse button on the data warehouse pane and click on create recreate, and what this will do is it will rebuild the structure of our table, and you'll get a message back saying the table's been updated. Now we need to update the script to load this, and this time I want you to right mouse button on stage, qualify, go down to code and click on rebuild. Rebuild update stage qualifying. We have a new property to this setup. It's called joins. So on the left hand menu you can click straight on joins, and here what's happened is it's now recognized you're trying to join a dimension to this table, and it wants you to marry up the business keys between the dimension and the fact in order to create the relationship. So under business keys matching, if it recognizes something that already marries up, it will automatically match this for you, but you still have the ability to change the business key if you wish with the drop down. And we're not going to change it, but just as a demonstration here, you can see there's all of the keys available for you to change. You can also set certain conditions so that when the update script is running, you can get warnings when things have been unmatched. You can get auto unmatched business keys, warnings, and you can write logs for any business keys that are just, not quite right. But we're going to leave all of that blank for the minute and click on OK. And the moment we click on OK, because we checked the box earlier on, it will rewrite and recreate the script file for you. So the last thing for us to do is to reprocess. So if you right mouse button on the stage qualifying table and click on execute update script, we'll get a slightly different result now. So in step 300 we get 9,575, and then step 400 is for the race dimension, 500 is for the driver's dimension. And again, we can right mouse button on our stage table and click on display data. And from here you can see not only the dimension keys have been populated, but you can see a summary of all of the data. So this stage table is now ready to become a fact table. What we're going to do now is go to our source browser, and there's a couple of ways you can refresh this. If you're a keyboard person like me, you can select one of the tables and use the F5 key and it will refresh. If you're more of a mouse person, you can click on the little yellow cylinder, and then you can click on refresh current, and that will then do the same thing and refresh all of the objects. Now inside of stage you will now see our new stage qualifying exists there, so we can now make that ready to bring in as a fact table. But to do that we need to prepare the target pane by double clicking on the fact table. Then once we've got that prepared, we can drag stage qualify and drop it straight into our target pane, and then it's automatically going to suggest turn this into fact qualifying and put it in the MART. So we've set it all up so it'll go into the MART schema. Click on add, and then straight away we get asked, okay, how do you want to prepare this to be processed? So we have no update procedure. So we're going to click on the rebuild button on the update script. And from here, we'll be asked to create the table because it doesn't exist. So we click create and load. And once we've done that, it will prompt us what properties do we need to set into the update script. So you will notice that the qualifying ID has already been generated because it's absorbed that from the stage table. We're going to turn this into a flush and fill. Change delete or delete before insert to truncate. And then because there'll be no other data, there's no need to have an include update statement. So we can untick that. And if you're interested, you can click next in the bottom left-hand corner, and you'll see the source table that's being used to generate this particular load table. And by clicking on OK, WhereScape will build the physical structure in the data warehouse and then generate the script used to process the data and process it for us. And again, in the results pane, you can see we've got 9,575 records applied, and they've all been added in straight away. And we can test that by using the right mouse button and click on display data. And there's our fact table for qualifying. So we've just built in a matter of minutes a fact table from a load all the way through to the fact. We've used existing dimensions, so we probably want to have a go at looking at that data now. So what we can do, in your instructions you'll have a little query you can run, but I can show you, if you don't want to write it yourself, I can show you where it is. Back in the source browser, there's a little orange sunglasses that will open up a T-SQL tool that you can use to write SQL and query your warehouse. So we're going to click on that button and it will launch for us. Then, if you go to File and click on Load SQL Script, there's a SQL script called Qualifying. So if you click on that, this is the same SQL script that you have in your PDF. And you can now select, use the green arrow to run it, or use F5 if you like using your keyboard. And this will return all of the drivers from that data who have finished in first position, and for anything in the Spanish Grand Prix. So there's lots of different names there. You should have 24 if everyone's got that right. Yeah, we're all nodding. Brilliant. Okay, and we can do more things with this. If we wanted to take the Spanish out, we can change our query, see who came second, first loser if you're Ricky Bobby's fan. What we'll do, if you're all happy, is we can carry on and bring in some data from a dimension, and we can augment our own data our existing fact tables with the new dimension. So if you minimize down that window, we're going to go straight back to loading the data in. So the team from the analytics department have asked you as a developer, can you bring in the constructors data against the race qualifying data, and can you tell us everything about the constructors that have, involved with any of the qualifying rounds? So we have the constructors data in our source system, we just haven't got it in our warehouse. So what we're going to do is go back and browse our F1 source system. So we're going to browse our F1 system and then click on OK again, and that will then change the source system panel, and we can then browse the DBO schema, and you'll see a few things to do with constructors, but the constructor table is what we want. So in order to prepare the load, get it into our load table, within the data warehouse browser, double click on the load table so that the target pane becomes ready for the source system, and we can drag constructor in straight away. It's going to give us our standard naming convention, suggest where to store it and the format it's going to store it in, and then we're going to click on add. Okay, so now we've got the properties of the load table, and as we did before, we want to change the script connection to be the default window runtime. The script template will become the WSL Postgres Python load. And once we've done that, we click on regenerate, and WhereScape will then go away and start the process of creating both the physical table and the script. So at this stage, we're going to click on create and load, and there we go. So we have 211 records that have been posted into our results screen. Coincidentally, if anyone's interested, you can see all of the steps of how that Python script works by scrolling up, and that'll tell you everything that's happened, and that's all logged internally and held in the audit. So whenever anyone does anything like this inside of WhereScape, the repository has got that full audit of change. So now we've loaded the data warehouse with our data from our source system. We now want to start manipulating that source system into a dimension table. So what we're going to do is, in our warehouse browser, right mouse button on data warehouse and browse, and we will then expand in our browser the stage, and you'll see load constructor is right at the very top now. So we want to take that load data and turn it into a stage. So if you double click on the stage in our data warehouse browser, you'll notice all the stage tables come into the target area, so we're in the right space, and we can drag load constructors and drop it into our stage. It will ask you for the naming convention. That's fine for us, stage constructors, and we'll click on add. Again, the staging property table will turn up, and at this point we just want to click on rebuild. At this point we can click on create and load. That will build the physical table. Now that table's been constructed, what we're going to do about the update script? Well, the first thing we want to do is set the business key, and we'll click on the parentheses button on the business key, and we'll select the constructor ID and click on the right button so it moves into the selected columns, and then we'll click on OK. Again, we're going to truncate and reload our stage table, so everything else is fine. We can click on OK, and then WhereScape will build that script for us. Not only will it build it, but it will execute it, because we've already set things up to execute for us straight away. And you can see 211 records have been processed. So you might be wondering what's going on here. Where is the scripts? How is this happening? Every time you build a script in your browser, every time you run the update process, a script's being built within the repository. You can follow along at this point. The scripts are being built in our host scripts section and being given a name that attaches itself to the object. So if you have stage constructor, you'll have update stage constructor, and I can see that here. And if I double click into the script, it will open it up and show me everything that's being built behind the scenes. So every time WhereScape builds a script, the template script will generate all of this lovely code in a very standard way. So it doesn't matter if I'm doing it or you're doing it. If we're working the tool the same way and we're using all the default templates, everyone's producing the same code. Everyone can read the code the same way. We won't have variations of Simon does it one way, Tyler does it another way, and make it difficult for people to support. But you can see down here we have code, and you can see how the Python script is being used to load the data in and interact between the source system and the load. Now we could sit here and figure all this out and go through it line by line by line, but I trust you guys will know what most of this stuff means, especially when you talk about the insert statement. That's a very standard SQL. If you're used to Python, you'll recognize the format, but it doesn't matter whether you produce a Python script, PowerShell script, T-SQL, the templates inside of WhereScape will generate standard code from everyone, and it's just really about the metadata that you include inside of the object that will impact this. So if you add more information in it, more transformation at a column level, that will be the difference that you'll see inside the code, but it's in such a way that it's easy to read and everyone knows what's what. Okay, so back to it. We have now created our stage table for our constructor. And I'm just going to right click on that and click on display data, and you'll see all of the lovely data that we previously loaded in. Now we want to turn that into a dimension table. So how do we do that? Well, we need to refresh our source browser, and now I can see stage constructor is in there. For step 1 done. If I then double click on the dimension table in the data warehouse browser, I will get a list of all my existing dimensions, and that gives me the opportunity to drag the stage constructor and drop it into my dimension table. At this point, it's going to auto recommend the name of the object, the dim constructor. I'll then click on add, and now we get to some really interesting parts. So inside of WhereScape, it can help you create types of dimensions: normal, slowly changing, previous values, or date ranges. Now they're all built into the product, so you just select the one you want to create, and it asks you for the various properties it needs, and then it will build it from the templates internally. To keep things simple for this demonstration, we're going to click normal, but we could do slowly if we wanted to, but let's go with normal for now. Now it's going to build out all of the properties as we did with the stage. So we now need to build an update statement. So if we click on the rebuild button next to update script, click on create and load to build the physical table in the data warehouse. And now we'll get properties for the update script. How do we want it to work? So we need to keep this in line with our fact tables. So I'd like us to keep everything as a truncate and then no update. But you'll also notice in here that business key has been picked up from the previous stage, and the 0 key record has been checked. And what that means is WhereScape will build a record every time the data warehouse runs. It will build a 0 key, and that 0 key will be used for anything it doesn't recognize. So if you get a business key it doesn't match up, it will be set to 0. So we're going to keep that checked. We're going to change delete before inserts to truncate, and we're going to uncheck include update statement. And then we click on OK. Now what's happened there is the script has been generated and executed straight away, and you can see our dimension record has been processed to 211 records, but we've actually got 212 records because the 0 key has been included as well. So right mouse button on the dim constructor and click on display data, and you can see everything there, including the first record, which is 0 key. So that means our dimension's ready to rock and roll. We can now start to include that in different fact tables. So what we're now going to do is amend our qualifying fact table to include the constructor. To do that, I'd like you to click on stage qualifying. That will load the stage table into the target. We now need to find the dim constructors table in our source browser. So I'm going to select something in the source browser and hit F5, and then from there I will see dim constructor, and I can drag and drop that in. So that's changed the structure of our stage table. First thing we're going to do on stage qualifying is right mouse button on stage qualifying, click on create and OK. That will build or rebuild the structure of the table. Now we need to rebuild the update procedure. So right mouse button on stage qualifying, go down to code, click on rebuild, and as that pops up we need to select joins in the left hand menu, and just make sure that constructor ID has been linked to constructor ID in that joins table, and then we'll click on OK. So now we need to process the script. So again, right mouse button on stage qualifying, and then click on execute update script, and then just test the data. So if you right mouse button on stage qualifying and click on display data, you're looking for dim constructors to have a whole set of numbers inside of it, not zeros. If you've got zeros, something's gone slightly wrong. But if you've got numbers, you're all good. Right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to take all that changes and put it into our fact table. So if you select your fact qualifying in your data warehouse browser, and then double click in the browser pane, the stage qualifying. So you might need to expand your stage schema and double click on stage qualifying. what will happen is when you double click, it will show you all the columns inside of that table. So we're missing the dimension constructor key. So we're going to grab that and drag and drop it into our fact table, and that will then throw all of the changes into our fact table. And you'll notice that you can see all of the columns and where they're coming from in there. What we now need to do is use that metadata to, one, update the structure, and two, update the procedure so that the column gets updated. The easiest thing to do is to right mouse button on fact qualifying in your data warehouse browser and click on create recreate and click on OK. That will change the structure, so that's part one done. And then if we right mouse button on the qualifying, and this time click on regenerate fact qualifying, and what that will do, regenerate your procedure based on the current properties that we set into the rebuild. So it's a step to mean that if we're not doing any material changes, it will just rebuild it with the new columns being incorporated. Once you get that back, that status coming back to say that it has been regenerated successfully, you can right mouse button on fact qualifying and then click on execute, update script, and then you'll get a message back saying it's been populated. And let's just test that by right mouse button on the fact qualifying and clicking on display and making sure our constructor column has some data in it, which it does do, which is great. So that's how simple it is to build a fact table and incorporate it into your data warehouse, and then build in a dimension and incorporate that into your data warehouse. We spent a little over half an hour, 20 minutes going through that whole process. All the scripts, as I mentioned, everything behind the scenes in WhereScape, building out standard code, making sure everything is nicely documented and has metadata inside of it. How do we know that this has been documented properly? How do we know that we have useful information here? Well, let's say we need a data lineage report. We need to figure out where does that column come from in our fact table. This time I'd like you to select fact results, and then on the result ID, right mouse button, go down to impact and click on track back report. And because we're at the end of our sort of visualization or presentation layer, what WhereScape will do is it will track back the lineage of where did that data come from, or where did that field come from. And as you can see here, it's come from the results table in our source system, which has then gone into our load table in our data warehouse, which has gone into our stage fact results, which then resulted in it being in our fact table. And if you have any transformation going along the way, you would see that in the transformation column. So there's one really useful thing. We've done all of that. In fact, let's try that on our qualifying tables that we've all built, our fact qualifying. So you click on fact qualifying, and let's use qualifying ID, right mouse button on it in the table, go to impact and click on track back, and we have the same data there. We've done none of this as part of this presentation. We got it for free by using WhereScape's metadata. The other thing we get from the metadata that we've built up is we can build diagrams of the fact tables. So I'd like you to, I've gone too fast. So from the builder pane, I'd like you to click on the diagram tab. This will take you into the diagram settings, and from here we can build diagrams around our fact tables, relationships, all that good stuff. I'd like you to click on new diagram in the top to open up the window, the wizard. Type, if we pick fact table, and in objects I'd like you to click on fact qualifying, and then from here we can do different types of diagrams, whether it's a schema, whether it's a source diagram or joins. We're going to go with a schema diagram, so we're going to click on that button there, and then for us it builds our star schema diagram, which shows all the relationships between the dimensions and facts. Fantastic. And the other things we can do, so we can click on the new diagram, we can keep the same but click on source diagrams, and this gives you a visual representation of the track back at a table level. From here we can also change the type of diagram. We have a detailed or standard. We're currently looking at the standard type. We can open it up and we can look at a detailed type, which will then start to incorporate all of the columns and how they flow through from one source to the end. And there are a lot more diagrams you can do depending on what type of data style or data visualization. Nope. There are lots of other types of diagrams you can use depending on your modeling methodology. So if you're doing things like data vault, you can look at a spine diagram, and if you know, again, we've just done a schema, so there's some of the usual ones. And also these are can be included in your documentation, which is what we're going to move on to next, is how do we generate the documentation behind fact qualifying so we can hand it out to the business and they can understand what we've built for them. So if we close that window down and go back into Builder, from here we have reporting, and in our reporting section create documentation, and we can set up a new set of documentation. We have to specify where we set it, so automatically it will go into our red folder, and that's fine. And if you just type qualifying, and it doesn't matter if you spell it wrong like me, we've called our document qualifying, and from here we can tick certain properties. I don't particularly like shadows around my diagram, so I'm going to untick shadow, but I'm going to leave everything else the same and click on OK. What WhereScape will now do is it will collate all the metadata around the qualifying facts table and produce it into a standard file. Now we've generated the documentation, we can pull it out and look at it by using the display documentation button, and it will jump straight into a HTML file. And in here we have two brands of documentation. We have user documentation, which is high level, just really showing you the facts and dimensions. And then you have technical information, which is more technical and helps show you the flow of data from source. So let's look at the user documentation to begin with. We can expand out facts, and we can look at qualifying. As I mentioned there, we have our diagram table inside of all of the details about the fact table, all the dimensions. We can use the hyperlinks to jump to drivers, and we can look at the driver's dimension, and this becomes quite an easy to use set of documentation you can release to the business so they can explore the fact table. What we can also do at the top is click on technical documentation, and in here we have a lot more to look through. And when we click on fact qualifying, you'll see we've got all different types of information around the procedure, the host scripts, everything that's been used to generate the document or the object. And as you go through, you can see more information about the physical structure as well as the data types included. And we carry on, we can talk about the transformation types, if any are used. But this time you'll also get the facts table as well as the source tracking. And you carry on, it's going through all this technical information that's really useful for anyone supporting the data warehouse. And from here we can look at all sorts of other things like jobs, like the stage tables, pick it apart without actually using WhereScape. So this can be used very quickly. And like I said, we've done none of this work up front. We've just built a fact table and a dimension table, used some existing dimensions, but WhereScape gave us all of this for free. The last thing to talk about is the scheduler, and the scheduler is, as any other scheduler is, it will help process through your data warehouse. We have already built up in here a set of jobs, and we like to segment our jobs into the different layers of the warehouse. Sometimes, depending on what we're doing, we might go the opposite way and do it to an endpoint. So if we're processing through to a data vault object, we might have one job that takes the data and processes it into that object, that raw vault object. From here, it's a simple case of when you edit or create a job, you build all the things that you want to happen. So for our load job, we're just loading everything in from our source system, and it's going to execute the update scripts behind each of these tables and then finish. It's really simple to administrate, and I'd like you to do this with your tables. So if you right mouse button on load no, 010 load tables, and click on edit tasks. This will open up the job. On the left hand side is the entire data warehouse. You can pick any object. On the right hand side is the things that are going to process. So I'd like you to expand all objects, expand load tables, and I want you can do two things. You can either double click an object and it will add it into the list, or you can select an object and use the right and left arrows depending on if you're pushing it over or pulling it across. And you can add in jobs in your own structure, in your own way, but what you're doing here is building this job at the moment, sequentially processing each one of these, and you have options to run things in parallel, run things separately, build groups, build jobs, build dependency between jobs, everything you expect from an enterprise level scheduler. And as I mentioned, this is now built with Azkaban behind it, so it is a mature scheduler service. So save this, we click on OK, and then we say yes to rebuild all the jobs. And then if I double click on my load job again, so we double clicked on the job, and as you can see, it's refreshed with all the new tasks that we've added into our jobs. So that's pretty much it. We've now got a challenge in the documentation. If you'd like to carry on with that, feel free.